Since public transport is looking a lot less appealing right now, motorcycling is a great way to get to the office. It's fast, fun, and socially distanced. But one major factor that puts many bikers off is the risk of getting your pride and joy nicked when you're grafting away at your desk. Thankfully, there are plenty of practical things you can do to minimize the risk of it being stolen. I've commuted by motorcycle in London for the past few years, so here are my 10 top security tips for motorcycle commuters. But before we get started, I'd like to say a big thank you to Lind Triumph for sponsoring this commuter series. They've got 4 shops across London with super helpful and friendly staff, so they'll be more than happy to help you out with any commuting related queries around security, bikes, gear, and accessories. There are links to their website, social media, and online store in the description below. Let's start with the basics though of how most motorcycles are stolen in the city. Firstly, they can easily be lifted into the back of a van by 2 or 3 people, especially if they're not secured to something immovable. They can then be driven away relatively inconspicuously, and the alarm won't be as loud and a tracker probably won't work. That said, a van in heavy traffic like in London or other big cities doesn't make for the best getaway vehicle, especially if they've been detected. So secondly, and perhaps more commonly, especially in London, is a bike being pushed away by a pair of people using a scooter or another motorcycle. One sits on the stolen bike with it in neutral, the other just puts their foot on the passenger foot pegs and pushes it along. So it really doesn't matter if you've got an immobilizer, because neither of these methods require the bike to be started in order to get it away. They can just put it in neutral and push it or carry it. Steering locks are typically quite easy to break too, so you're going to need to add more layers of security to your bike in order to deter would-be thieves. Essentially, it's all about making your bike look like a tricky target. A lot of thieves are opportunists looking for poor security in locations where they'll go undetected. So just because you're nipping into a shop for a couple of minutes, or maybe you're going to your mate's house and just leaving it on the drive outside, that doesn't mean it won't be stolen. If it looks easy to steal, it only takes a moment for the wrong person to be passing by and it'll be gone. Even in what might seem like secure parking, it's not worth taking the risk. So always make sure you've got some form of security with you when you're riding into the city. And for this reason, it's worth planning ahead realistically. If you think you'll be tempted to go for that after work drink, or perhaps the weather looks like it's going to take a turn for the worse later in the day, perhaps leave the bike at home that day or work from home. Some of the business districts of London, for example, are pretty damn quiet in the evening and over the weekends. So they're not exactly a good place to leave your bike for a long amount of time. Again, even in secure parking. It'll be quiet and easy for someone to work on your locks for a while without being detected. So in my opinion, you're best off just leaving the bike at home. It should go without saying that you ought to park your bike in the most secure location that you've got available to you. Sometimes it can be a bit of an administrative hassle to get your ID card approved for the underground parking at your office, for example, but it will almost certainly be worth it if you've got a security barrier, CCTV, security guards, and something to lock your bike to. Unfortunately, that's a luxury that a lot of us don't have. And of course, there are times where you'll need to go to other locations in the city, in which case, plan ahead and choose the most secure parking bay you can find. If there's one, for example, right outside your office door, then that might be a good shout. If you can see it from your window or hear it from your desk, then that's going to give you some peace of mind. Busier bays, in my opinion, tend to be better because there'll be more bikers in and out through the course of the day. And again, look for CCTV, security guards outside nearby offices, and something to lock your bike to like a ground anchor or a railing. Public multi-story car parks might also be an option, but again, be cautious because the motorcycle bays can quite often be tucked away in a quiet spot. It might be better to have your bike parked in a public bay that's really visible outside your office than it is in a multi-story on the 5th floor a few streets away. Now there's one security device that's going to help stop your bike being ridden, lifted or pushed away, and that's a big chain like this. Oh. You need something big, solid and heavy with a decent padlock. Personally, I use an Almax and then this shrouded padlock, which is a bit more difficult to attack. But there are plenty of options out there if you do your research, and I'm sure Triumph London would be happy to advise. You got to be prepared to spend a bit because a cheap, soft, thin chain can be cut in seconds. You ideally want thick, hardened steel that's going to make some serious noise and take some time to cut through with an angle grinder. It's not particularly practical to carry a massive chain around like this unless you have decent sized hard luggage, but you can leave it chained up if you've got a regular parking spot. And then make sure you use it to secure your bike to something immovable like a ground anchor, railing, or a lamppost. Otherwise it can just be lifted away. A chain's going to make no difference. If none of those immovable objects are available to you, it might be worth having a chat with some of the other bikers that park in your bay. Looping your chains through one another's will actually make both bikes tricky to lift, but at the end of the day when you're leaving, you can just unlock it and ride away. Generally, it's better to chain your bike through the frame. If it's a really valuable bike, thieves might go to the extent of removing a wheel to get the rest of the bike away. But realistically, most parking bays require you to park perpendicular to the curb, and all of those ground anchors and railings tend to be at the back, so more often than not, you'll have to make do with the rear wheel. Lastly, on chains, they're easier to attack if they're on the ground. You can put pressure on them with a cutter or attack them with a sledgehammer. So twist them and wrap them to get them off the ground so they're harder to press down on. Even if you've got a decent chain at home and a good one locked around a lamppost at work, there are always going to be those times when you need to leave your bike in a different location for a few moments, so it's always a good idea to carry a few disc locks. Now, of course, they won't stop your bike being lifted, but anyone planning to push it away will need to break them first. Just like with chains, the more you spend, the more difficult they're going to be to cut or smash. For disc locks, I'd say the more the merrier, and I try to use different types as well. If a thief knows how to pick the locks of one manufacturer, there's a chance they might not know for another sort. Now, if your disc locks are particularly robust, or you've got a few of them, a thief might choose to try and cut the disc instead. Fortunately, most bikes have got 2 discs on the front and 1 on the back, so you can spread them out to make it a bit more tricky. You can also look for difficult places to access, so if the bikes are all packed up in a bay, then it's going to be more difficult to get to the rear disc with an angle grinder than it is the front. Alarmed disc locks are a good idea too. They'll create a bit of noise and draw some attention, which just might be enough to put someone off. A single alarmed disc lock alone isn't going to save your bike, but it's about layering up all of these little things to make it an undesirable target. Like I said earlier, don't just leave your bike unsecured outside a shop, even if it's just for a few minutes. Always carry a disc lock or 2 that's easily accessible, and use it every time your bike is out of your sight as a bare minimum security measure. Now, a motorcycle cover is hardly a force field, but it might make your fancy bike a bit less noticeable. I tend to go for black, unbranded covers, and the tattier and grubbier they get, the better. Again, it might not be something that you want to carry with you on every single commute unless you've got decent luggage, but if you can stash it somewhere convenient, it's another good layer of protection. One word of caution with covers though, if you've left it out in the rain and your bike is wet from a drizzly commute, then just be careful not to get it stuck to your exhaust pipes. Nobody likes to have to scrape molten plastic off their headers. Trust me, I know. It's sometimes a good idea to let the bike dry out and cool off for a few minutes. Although I said earlier that steering locks are easy to break, you should definitely use it every time you leave your bike. For one, it could be that last thing that delays your bike being stolen for a few seconds, and it's just enough for a thief to be disturbed. But possibly more important than that is the fact that some insurers require them to be employed. If there's CCTV in the area and it shows that your bike was stolen without the steering lock on, it gives them that excuse not to pay out. I have actually heard of that happening, and it only takes a second to turn the key that 1 extra notch, so what have you got to lose? Getting an alarm fitted to your bike isn't a bad idea at all. It'll obviously draw attention to it and might be a bit more tricky to disable than a disc alarm, which could potentially just get smashed up. Just don't trust an alarm as your only security measure though. It's not going to stop your bike from physically being moved, it will just make a racket. I'm a massive advocate of getting a tracker fitted though. There are plenty on the market. Triumph have their own Track Plus product which you can speak to the guys at Triumph London about, but just do your research and find the one that fits your needs and budget. The most obvious benefit is that some thieves will ditch a bike in an alley to see if it's tracked before the next day moving it onto a warehouse or garage, so that gives you a little bit of time to potentially track your bike down, albeit at your own risk. I have heard of numerous bikes being recovered this way, both first-hand from people I work with and also from some of the London motorcycling Facebook groups I'm in. But that's not the only benefit of a tracker. Personally, I really like the ability to just look on my phone and see if my bike's where I left it. Maybe I'm in a meeting at a different office and the parking bay I had to use wasn't the best. And when it's on your mind like that, it's just nice to be able to check. Lastly, there are a number of property marking services like data tag or alpha dots, which apply a unique code to various parts of your bike and then register them to the owner on their database. This makes it way more likely that the bike will make its way back to the owner if recovered, even if it's been repainted or the plates have been changed. All new Triumphs come with data tag fitted, so feel free to ask the guys at Lind for more info, but if your bike doesn't already have some form of property marking, then it might be worth looking into. So those are my top 10 tips for securing your bike when riding into the city. A big chain with a bunch of disc locks and a cover are the most effective in my eyes, but you can layer up all the rest of it and it'll help to make your bike the least tempting target. Let me know if there are any security tips I've missed in the comments below, and I'd also love to hear your advice for securing the bike at home or in the garage. And as always, if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.